Okay. Kia ora everyone. So just getting my screen all set up. Oh, it's another Friday. I think this is about our 7th or 8th Friday, so we're doing pretty well. I thought we might only last a month and then run out of things to talk about, but there seems to be always lots to talk about when it comes to immigration stuff. I have just set it up for half an hour today, so if people want to jump in and ask questions, they can. The topic today I was going to talk about was the status of New Zealand citizens. The number one area that I find our New Zealand people don't understand is their own status. And when I say status, I mean immigration status. Are you a permanent resident? Are you a temporary resident? Are you a citizen of Australia? Are you a dual citizen of both New Zealand and Australia? How do you know what you are, and how can you find out if you don't know? So last week I did a screen share and showed people how to apply for travel records and police checks, and also this thing called a Vivo check, which is basically getting your visa checked online. I found that New Zealanders have difficulty doing this now. The online system with the department has changed, and generally New Zealanders have to contact the department and ask them for some kind of passcode or password so that they can tap into the system to get a printout of what their immigration status is. What I did on the website, on our Morunga migration.com.au website, is there is a Vivo check link there. What you can do is you can type in your details, you fill out a form, and then that comes to me, and what I do then is I'll do the Vivo check for you. There's no charge for it. It takes me a few minutes to be able to pull those details up for you, and then I email it to you. If you send it through, it can take me anywhere from, I don't know, a day to 3 days to get that back to you. So if you can wait that long, you can do your Vivo through us. Otherwise, the other way is to contact the department, I think, or go on the Department of Home Affairs website, and they've got instructions on how to do that. So that's really important in understanding your visa status. I've had a lot of people come and use that service of ours, particularly New Zealanders that have been here for decades, and quite a few of them are shocked to see that they're considered temporary residents. So I thought I'd talk today about the status of New Zealand citizens. There is a section on the website. I think this is the most important place to start when you're a New Zealand citizen living in Australia, is understanding your status first and foremost. The problem with understanding it is it's not straightforward. So there's quite a bit to understand, and kind of just a few things that you need to know beforehand before you can kind of assess yourself. In addition, what I talk about today, you can also go to our website. There is a link there that talks about, and it's called Status of New Zealand Citizens. So there's a bit of a timeline there. I'm just kind of having a look on my other screen so I can remember what is on there. So I do a timeline. I explain the different titles or labels that we've had over the years. Going back pre-1973 is kind of where we had different titles. So I can touch on those briefly. I've put up a post a few minutes ago too. If you've got questions that you want to ask, but you want to ask them privately or anonymously, just send them through in a private message. I've got my I've got a device here so that I can see any private messages coming through. And then, yeah, so if you want to ask things in private, you don't want it to be public, then you can do that, and I'll ask a question, but I won't say your name, okay? Because there's lots of stuff in immigration where people are worried about their situation but don't want to ask, or don't want, just shy about it. So yeah, anyway, you can do it that way. And okay, sweet. All right, so I'm going to start talking about the immigration status of New Zealand citizens, and I'll talk about this for the next half hour, see how we go. If there's lots of questions come through, that's fine. I'll keep going till 3 o'clock. So it's 2:05 here at the moment. And yeah, we'll just see how it goes. Cool. So the status of New Zealand citizens kind of starts, if we go back in history, it starts off, I'll just do a very quick rundown of the timeline. So pre-1973, we were known as British subjects because we were part of the Commonwealth. And at that time, there was no real rules about coming and going out of each other's countries. So I'm talking about New Zealand and Australia in particular, nowhere else. So we could kind of come and go until 1973. There was, I guess, our travel arrangements were formalised between our two countries, and that's when the introduction of the Trans-Tasman travel arrangement was put in place. At that point, we became known as exempt non-citizens. So you often hear this term permanent residents, and this is where a lot of New Zealanders will call themselves permanent residents. But back in those days, between 73 and 1994, so for quite a long time, just over 20 years, we were considered exempt non-citizens. And there's certain things under law that recognises exempt non-citizens like a permanent resident or similar to a permanent resident. But I guess the difference is that you're still not a permanent resident. But to make things easier, I suppose everyone just call themselves permanent residents. And the thing to understand about exempt non-citizens, we were exempt from having to, for a period, we didn't need a visa to come into Australia, and we also, up until 1981, we didn't need to use a passport to come into Australia. So those, in 1981, Australia then required New Zealand citizens to hold a passport, present a passport, and show that before they could enter the country. And then there was a section in time. So at that point, from 73 and even before, right up to 1986 now, so we've got a different time period, and this timeline's all on the website. In 1986, in August of 1986, the rules for exempt non-citizens changed in the Citizenship Act. And what it basically said was, if you're an exempt non-citizen and you have children born in Australia, they are not going to be recognised as Australian citizens at birth. They have to live here for the first 10 years of their life, and the 10-year rule applies where they can then be recognised as Australian citizens only on their 10th birthday, only if they've resided here, and that's if children are born to exempt non-citizens. If a child was born to an Australian citizen or someone who was considered a permanent resident, so usually someone who held a permanent visa, their children were recognised as citizens from birth always. That's never changed. But for exempt non-citizens, it did change, and that was New Zealanders in particular. So between 1986, so 20th of August to be exact, up until the 1st of September 1994, or 31st of August actually 1994, if our children were born in that period to New Zealand parents who were exempt non-citizens, those babies are not citizens at birth. They became citizens on their 10th birthday. And I have touched on this before in other videos when I talk about citizenship, but it all ties into our status that we need to know. And also, I've said this before, but I'll say it again. If you applied for a New Zealand passport for your child and they were born here, that doesn't stop them from being recognised as an Australian citizen. I know a lot of New Zealand families that I've worked with over the years really panic about the fact that they got a New Zealand passport for their child, they got New Zealand citizenship by descent. They panic and worry that they forfeited somehow their child's Australian citizenship. That doesn't happen. So, and that's where dual citizenship comes into play. New Zealand and Australia allow us to share citizenship with both countries. So our children, even if they hold a New Zealand passport, but they were born here in Australia, whether they were citizens at birth or maybe they had to wait till their 10th birthday, they are dual citizens, regardless of whether you got them a New Zealand passport. Okay, so between 86 and 94, there was that weird change with the exempt non-citizen. On the 1st of September 1994 is when the 444 visa was introduced. Now, I know more and more people are becoming familiar with this term. The 444 visa is also known as the special category visa. So the special category visa is kind of like the big label, and the little label is a subclass TY444, which we just call the 444 to make it easier. That visa was introduced on the 1st of September 1994, and the reason for that was Australia made it a rule that all residents in Australia must hold a valid visa. Before that, when we were exempt non-citizens, we didn't hold a visa at all. We had no visa. So when you hear New Zealanders say, I don't hold a visa, they might be right. They might not. How a 444 visa is triggered, though, is if you're a New Zealand citizen, you leave the country, you come back into the country, even if you've gone out just for a holiday, you come back into the country, the 444 visa is automatically granted. But the problem is it's on this computer system. You don't get a piece of paper to say you now hold a 444 visa. You also don't get told what that visa means in its entirety. A 444 visa, if you don't know much about it, is a temporary visa. So when it was introduced in 1994 for New Zealand citizens, we were granted this temporary resident status, which seems really weird, especially if we were living here before then and we were exempt non-citizens. We were pretty much the same as a permanent resident, but somehow overnight the laws changed, new rules came in, and then we went from that status to a temporary resident. And this is kind of where the beginning of things become problematic, because it's at that change our New Zealand people were not informed. So no one was sent a letter from immigration. There was nothing. Somehow we were supposed to absorb that knowledge and understanding from who knows where and understand what that meant for us. So essentially we went from being a permanent resident or exempt non-citizen to a temporary resident. We were never told about it. We, however, are still considered a permanent resident under the Citizenship Act. And this is where immigration is a little bit tricky, because in immigration you've got two main areas of law. You have the Migration Act. The Migration Act deals with anything to do with visas, okay, and people who are not Australian citizens. So for all non-citizens, the Migration Act is what rules over us. If you're an Australian citizen or you're going for Australian citizenship, that's where the Citizenship Act takes care of that. And the Citizenship Act says who is and who isn't an Australian citizen, and who can and who can't become an Australian citizen. An analogy that I like to use particularly when I'm doing the information sessions face-to-face with people, is getting them to understand that there's a Citizenship Act and there's this Migration Act, and both of them have statuses for us, but depending on when we lived in Australia or here, those laws will apply to us differently, and those laws will have determined a certain kind of immigration status for us. So I'm just going to pause for a moment. I think I've got some messages coming through. I'm not sure if this is for the live. I think it's just a private message. Just let me know if it's for the live. You want me to answer this? Because I'm not sure she's watching it. All right, so probably the easiest way I can explain our status is to take you to something that you're familiar with. Immigration is not something that people are really familiar with, not automatically. But I want to use something that you are familiar with, and I'm going to use the analogy of a driver's license. So I've got my little props here. I'm going to talk about, which way do I go? L-platers. So we all know what an L-plater means. I'm going to talk about P-plates, and I don't have a card for a license, so I've just pulled mine out of my purse. This is the South Australian driver's license. They're not like Queensland and all the other states, but that's my license. So that's a full license. We know that when you're going for a driver's license, generally speaking, you start with an L plate, you move to a P plate, and then eventually you can move to a full license. When in immigration, it's similar. So an L plate is the same as holding a temporary type of visa. When you hold an L plate, you can't go directly to a full license, right? And that's because you've got to do something in between. You've got to get your P plate. Immigration's the same. When you want the full license, which is equivalent to citizenship, Australian citizenship, what happens is that you need to go through the process. So you start off with your L plate, and this is for New Zealand citizens mainly, but it might apply to other migrants, but I'm just focusing on our New Zealand people. When you come into the country and you hold a 444 visa, it is the same as an L plate because it's a temporary visa. Okay, there's restrictions on it. You're allowed to be on the road, but there's lots of conditions around it. Same with our visa. Problem is that we don't often understand the conditions because we're not advised that when we come into the country. Like I said, we don't get a piece of paper to say you're now a 444 visa holder. Everyone else in the country that gets a visa, whether they're tourists, whether they're here permanently, it doesn't matter what reason, they all get a copy of their visa, usually via email nowadays. So they get an electronic copy. We don't. We're somehow supposed to understand what that visa means. And so with a 444, it has the same weight, power as an L plate, except New Zealand citizens are allowed to live in Australia, we're allowed to work in Australia, and there's no time limit. So long as we pass health, tuberculosis is the only thing they really point out, and character, those are the only two things that we really have to be able to meet to come and live in Australia or visit, travel in and out of Australia. Now, the notion that we don't apply for a visa to come into the country is actually not quite correct. We actually do apply for a visa. We apply for it usually when we're coming in on a plane into Australia. So it's the process of filling out what's called an incoming passenger card. So we all have filled in one of those before. I've looked at it closely. It does not say visa application on it anywhere because it's not normally a visa application, but for New Zealand citizens, it actually is a visa application. We don't realise that we've just filled out a visa application. It's really important that we put all the correct information on that visa application. To every other migrant or even Australian citizens that fill it out when they come into the country, to them it's just an incoming passenger card. But for us, it's actually a visa application. When you give that at the airport or whatever port you come in, that then gets converted to a 444 visa if you're a New Zealand citizen who does not hold dual citizenship or any visa of any other kind. And on the computer systems, that's your status. So you're the same as an L plater. Now, to move from an L plate, if you want a full license, you have to get the P plate, okay? So for our New Zealand people to get this full license, we have to get a P plate. Now, P plate basically, I think there's a New South Wales plates that I got on that trip. The P plate is equivalent to getting a permanent visa, to become a permanent resident. So you have to be a P plater in order to get citizenship. This is the trickiest, hardest part of the immigration process for us. I wouldn't say getting citizenship is easy either, but this is the hardest part. Once you hold a P plate, you can then, after 12 months, normally apply for your dual citizenship. You just apply for Australian citizenship. It doesn't tamper with our New Zealand citizenship. We get to have both fully. We have both, it just means we get to live in each country securely without worrying about laws changing, goalposts moving, any of that kind of stuff. But whilst we're holding a P plate, it still means that we are under the Migration Act because we are still a non-citizen, but except we're now permanent residents. Okay, so that's kind of how that process works. But going back to the timeline I was talking about at the beginning, I think most of us now, or a lot of us, will understand that there was some significant law change in February of 2001. And this is on the timeline that I've put on the website to explain it a bit more. But what happened is that for all of our New Zealand people that were living in Australia up until the 26th of February 2001, there was a significant law change. You had to have been living here either for 12 months between 1999 and 2001, or you had to be in Australia on the 26th of February 2001. When this law changed, it created a divide between us as New Zealanders living in Australia. Our TY444 visa didn't change at all. It stayed exactly the same. It's still the same today. But something else happened as well. If you were a New Zealand citizen living in Australia on the 26th of February 2001 and you were here, or you were here for 12 months immediately within the 2 years before that change, you actually have a unique status. You are a 444 visa holder, same as an L plater, but you are the only migrant in the country who holds a P plate as well. So you hold two statuses at the same time. And how that works is that under the Migration Act, you are a 444 visa holder. The definition of a 444 is a temporary visa. So you hold that, but under the Citizenship Act, you actually are considered a permanent resident. So you have this dual status, which, like I said, doesn't happen for any other migrant. Well, not that I know of. I'd bet on it. It's not the same for anyone else. So when you're a New Zealand citizen who has both of these together, this is the group of New Zealanders that can then go on and apply for a full license or dual citizenship without the need to apply for a permanent visa separately. In fact, if you hold these two, you shouldn't be applying for a permanent visa because it would be a waste of time and a waste of money. You don't need it. You've got the status. You've got the bridge to getting a full license because you've got your P plate. Just that you hold two at the same time. In one way, you're a non-citizen who's a temporary resident, but at the same time, you're a non-citizen who's considered a permanent resident. And the permanent resident part means nothing to a New Zealander unless they use it to apply for citizenship. And the other area that we consider permanent residents in the area of law is Social Security. So for New Zealand citizens that were here in 2001 on the 26th of February or 12 months before that, you can have access to Centrelink, which is why a lot of our New Zealand people think that, oh, why do I even need to bother? For a lot of them, they think that they're permanent residents only. They don't realise they hold this as well. Or for some, they might understand that they're TY444 visa holders, but they don't care because they can still access Centrelink if they need to, and they can become citizens if they want to. But what I say to people is, this P plate means nothing if you don't use it for either Centrelink purposes or, more importantly, citizenship purposes. You may as well just be on that. But if you want to go for the full license and have the full protections under the law, don't be subject to the Migration Act anymore, then you're best to utilise your L and P status and become a full license holder. So hopefully that was clear as mud. So that's a significant change in 2001. Understanding that concept is crucial. If you are a person who holds both an L and P plate, you have to be able to say yes to one of these three questions, okay? If you can say yes to one of these three questions, then you hold both. Question number one, were you in Australia on the 26th of February 2001? I'll repeat that question. Were you in Australia on the 26th of February 2001? If you can say yes, you are that status. Now, you'll notice I didn't say, were you living in Australia on the 26th of February 2001? All I said was, were you in Australia on that date? So this is what the law says. If a New Zealand citizen was in the country on that day, they have this status. And currently, that status still stands. So even if you were just here for that one day, you hold this. That means someone could have been here for that one day, come back to Australia tomorrow, and they will have this status, and in the near future, they can apply for citizenship over someone who holds this visa and has been living here for 20 plus years now, just over 20 years, working and paying taxes. I'll let that sink in for a moment. So a person who was here for one day, if they happen to be lucky enough to be in Australia on the 26th of February 2001, they never lose this status. If they come to Australia tomorrow and they have babies here and they're born here, their babies are Australian citizens at birth. Children born to L and P platers in Australia are citizens at birth. Okay, so that's question number one. If you can say yes to that, congratulations. I have a bit of a laugh. I always say it's a bit like being at Housey, you know, at Whare Whare, and that person's got the one card and they win the super, and you're all sitting there with your 6+ cards, all taped to the table with your dabbers or coins and going hard, but someone has snuck in and beat you to being able to access citizenship and even Centrelink. So anyway, but this is law. This is how law works. You've got to understand how it works, because it's not always about what's fair and right. It's about, this is what the law says. Too bad, you can't argue it. That's what's set in stone. Now, question number two is, were you in Australia for a minimum of 365 days between 26th of February 1999 and the 26th of February 2001. So you might not have been here on that 26th of February 2001 exactly, but were you here? They say 12 months, but to be really specific, it's 365 days. It doesn't have to be 365 days in a row. It's a 2-year window, and it is, you have to have been here for a total of 365 days or more in that window, that 2-year window of time. If you can say yes to that, you too hold an L and a P plate, which is great news. This is the status that's allowed to apply for Australian citizenship without having to apply for a permanent visa on its own. Okay, so that's question number two. So let's say question number one, you weren't here on the 26th of February 2001 exactly, but you might have been here for 12 months in between. In my own family, my husband was here for just over 12 months in that time. He was working in Sydney, preparing, doing construction in preparation for the Sydney Olympics. So you might know people that were here at that time working, and if they were here for 12 months, then they meet that criteria. And again, children born to people who hold both of these in Australia, if the kids are born here, they are Australian citizens at birth. This is really important because so many kids get misdiagnosed, their status gets misdiagnosed because people don't understand this concept. And to be honest, I don't know anyone else that really understands this concept in the immigration world, you know, in the profession. But that's the best way I can explain it. I think people can kind of grasp this better than trying to talk about law stuff on its own. Now, the third question is the trickiest one to answer. So remember, you don't have to answer yes to both of those questions that I just asked. It's to one or the other. If you can say yes to one of them, sweet, you're in. There's a third question, and this one is quite tricky to explain, so bear with me. I can't share my screens at the same time while I do this. I don't know. Haven't worked out how to do it. I don't think Facebook does it yet. But the third one is based around what's called a Centrelink certificate, or a certificate of Australian residence. And this certificate is provided by Centrelink, or Services Australia now. And this certificate is generally given to New Zealand citizens, and I say generally because we've had cases where it's not been exactly this, is if you came to live in Australia between the 27th of February 2001 and the 25th of May 2001, if you came in that kind of 3-month window, then you came to live, you may be considered that. It's a bit trickier because you have to be on the Centrelink system, so they have to have a record of you. If you were collecting Centrelink like family tax benefit or rental assistance, and you collected that before 2004, February 26, 2004, but you had to have moved here also between 27th of February and 25th of May 2001, so you had to do those two things together, you can't just do one or the other, then it's likely you are going to be what's called a transitional customer. Transitional customers are allowed these Centrelink certificates. If you get given a Centrelink certificate, you then have your ticket to apply directly for citizenship. And any child that you may have had in Australia up to that point, and even now, is an Australian citizen at birth. Okay? So that one's a bit tricky. There's also something else in there. If you were receiving a Centrelink payment on the 26th of February, so let's say you might have been claiming family tax benefit, you didn't meet the 12-month requirement, you were out of the country, you might have gone on a holiday or gone back to New Zealand for something on the 26th of February 2001, so you weren't here for 12 months, you weren't here on that day, but you were actually living here and you were collecting a Centrelink payment such as family tax benefit. So long as you arrive back in the country before, I think it's the 25th or 26th of August, you had 6 months. So long as you came back in that 6-month period, you can also be considered this as well. And there's a couple of other little grey areas that's tricky, and that's all got to do with social security law. It doesn't even have anything to do with citizenship and the Migration Act. So it's an area that I actually don't know anyone in the whole country of Australia that specialises or understands that area of law. So it's a real grey area, and it's an area that I love to push because, yeah, we get lots of successes. We don't always get successes, but it's worthwhile pushing, because if you can get that approved, then, you know, you take your New Zealand citizen from being an L-plater by itself to having this. And sometimes people could be living here for, well, over 20 years now, and they don't realise that they are both of these, and they've been told by Centrelink and immigration that, no, you're not, but actually you are. But anyway, that's a real complex area, and I've actually dealt with a lot of cases like that lately. But it's always good if we get yes from the department, because then we can just skip the P-plate process and go straight for citizenship. All right, I've got questions coming through, so I'll have a bit of a look. So I think these questions are on here. I'm not sure. Oh, that one sent me a screenshot. I'll go through some of these questions and see if there's anything. Oh, kia ora, James. Good to see you again. Yes, go tonu town. Oh, kia ora, Gina. Oh, kia ora, Mel. Lovely to see you. Kia ora, Alicia. Kia ora, Edna. I love the way you explain this using drive. Yeah, I think it just makes it so much easier, eh? Like, yeah, we just want to make it as easy for people to understand as possible. Kia ora, Jace. Thank you. Teresa, you don't need to apply for PR, go straight for citizenship. I'm also going to work out. All right, that's okay. I should say this. Be really, really careful, even if you're a L and a P plater and you are entitled to apply for citizenship, be really careful. I always say to people, get proper advice first, because depending on your situation, that could be detrimental to family members if you need to do something for your family, okay? This is okay. You can apply for citizenship if you're by yourself, you're either single, or you might already be with an Australian citizen or permanent resident and they don't need it. Your kids might already be citizens. Be really careful. It's a great opportunity and it's good to know, but just be careful, because you might. The thing is, once you apply for citizenship, you cut off other options for your family members as well. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're the main income earner in your family and none of your family meet this criteria, okay? You brought them over from New Zealand, say, you're the main income earner, you're earning over $53,900 taxable income a year. You guys have got kids that were born in New Zealand, they're under 23 years of age and they're dependent, or you might have a child with severe disability, they're over 23 and dependent. These family members can be included in certain types of applications. And sometimes they can't be sponsored, they have to be included. If you are this, but you are the main income earner in your home, you earn over that threshold amount, it might be better for you to apply for a permanent visa, such as a subclass 189, where you can include your family members, okay? But every case is different, so be really careful. What I'm sharing with you is important information, but it is quite general, and you'll have these pathways, but it might not always be right for you. You can really cut off valuable opportunities if you're not careful. So I always say to people, go and get the proper advice. You can book the consultation with me if you want to be 100% sure, or go and talk to another migration agent, but don't just jump at it. Be really careful. And I've seen this happen lots of times where people have gone, yeah, I qualify for that. So like the RRB, yeah, I qualify for that. I'll just go and apply for that. And they might be the main income earner. They might be the doorway for their family to apply for the visa. So yeah, be really careful, but this is important for us to know. Justine, niece and nephew born in Oz and lived in Oz over 10 years. What do they have to do to prove their citizenship? They also have New Zealand passports. Okay, so on our website, Justine, there's a section called Evidence of Citizenship. And what they have to do is they have to apply for a citizenship certificate to now prove that they are Australian citizens. That's basically the only way they can prove it. I mean, they can provide movement records, but movement records don't mean anything to people who don't understand how the laws work. So an Australian citizenship certificate is really important, and that certificate is then valuable for them to apply for Australian passports. And you can hold both passports if you want, a New Zealand passport and an Australian passport at the same time. But I encourage anyone who's got children, even if the child is an Australian citizen from birth, if they have a New Zealand parent, so let's say mum's an Australian citizen but dad's a New Zealand citizen, say, it's still good for that child to get an Australian citizenship certificate because it proves beyond doubt, and it's good for them to have for the rest of their lives. And I always say, explain this to your children as they get older. Explain to them that, immigration is quite complex, that they might get questioned. Someone one day in a government department might assess them as not being an Australian citizen and say there was a mistake made. But if they hold a citizenship certificate, they can easily fight that and go, no, you don't get these unless you definitely are. Passports have been revoked because passports have been issued by mistake, but citizenship certificates are a whole different ballgame. So they are really important pieces of paper. And I always say to people, don't lose your citizenship certificate too. It's not like reapplying for a birth certificate or a marriage certificate, because you actually have to go through a whole application process to get a replacement for it. And it's not cheap. Like now they're like $240 for a certificate. So they're not like $30 odd dollars like birth certificates and that. They're quite expensive in comparison, and you do have to reapply like fully forms and passport photos and all sorts of things just to get a copy of that. Jace, okay, we'll definitely be going through you when we go through the process. Yeah, look, Jace, I just think it's important that everyone gets that right advice first before they go full ball into doing anything, because there's so many other twists and turns that can happen. Jenny, kia ora Irina. When I was 13, I came over to Sydney on my mother's passport, so that was in 83. I went to school in Randwick for 6 months. Can I get returning resident return visa, or do I get citizenship? How do I go about it? Okay, Jenny, so only New Zealand citizens that hold this kind of status, or if they hold a permanent visa of some sort, can apply for citizenship. In your case, I'm assuming you weren't here in February 2001, you weren't here for the 12 months, you don't meet the transitional customer definition. So in that case, what I would say is it's likely that in your case, I would look at the resident return visa as being your best pathway. Once you've got your resident return visa, depending on how long you've lived here for, if usually the quickest is 12 months after you've got your visa, then you can apply for your citizenship after that. So if I don't earn the threshold income of 53,000, does that matter if I lived here as a child and have returned a few times? Kia ora, Sue. No, it doesn't matter if you came here as a child. I don't know how old you are, but if you came as a child, and assuming that was before September 94, then no, that doesn't matter in your case. But again, I would get specific advice because there's other things about your situation I don't know. But based on that little bit of information, the income stuff doesn't. And it's funny because people will say, oh, I want to apply for citizenship, and they might be this, they might hold this status, but then they talk to me about, but I haven't earned over the 53,900, and I go, oh, you don't have to because you don't need that. You're all good. You can go for the full license. And I'm like, oh, okay. But, and I've seen people like this apply for resident return visa when they don't need to because they've already got this pay plate or this permanent resident status, which allows them to apply for Australian citizenship. Again, lots of information is out there on the internet, especially social media. We have heaps of migration agents all over Facebook and the New Zealand Facebook pages, especially giving advice. And they're not migration agents, by the way. I'd like to meet another New Zealand migration agent. That would be cool. I'd have someone to talk to and learn off, hopefully. But this stuff is so important to be careful. So you don't apply for the wrong things, and you don't apply for stuff that's going to cut you off or cut your family members off if that's what you also need to do. Yeah, it's not as easy as just paperwork. It's quite tricky for us New Zealand citizens because the laws apply to us differently than anyone else. So you might hear people say, oh, well, you just got to do what other migrants do. That's not accurate. We do, some of us have to apply for a permanent visa first, like other migrants, but at the same time, the criteria is quite different for us usually as well. So 48, oh, okay. So yeah, so long as you came before 1st of September 94, you weren't with the military, you weren't a diplomat or child of a diplomat, those are normally the exceptions to the rule. And did you hold a New Zealand passport? No, so those types of things. I always have to be careful because I never like to assume things about people's situations, which is why the consultation process is so important, because there's a lot of questions that have to be asked and established to be 100% sure whether you have a pathway and whether there's going to be any risks involved, or if it's going to cause problems for your family or for other situations that you might be looking at. So sometimes people will come to me, they qualify for RRB, but they don't have a job and they've got no income, they're in desperate need. And sometimes it's not good for them to apply for an RRB straight away if they qualify, because they need to access some money. They need to get some Centrelink payments, and they might qualify for the 6-month payments through Centrelink, the one-off. Because once you get an RRB or a permanent visa, if you are collecting any of that 6-month payments that you are normally eligible for, the moment you become a permanent resident, your payments will stop because you're no longer a TY444 visa holder. So that's just one kind of example, but yeah, there's heaps of situations where you've got to be careful. Bevan, how do you prove your arrival date if no longer have the original passport you came into Australia? Mine got damaged in a fire. Oh, cool. There's two instances that qualify. Okay, so Bevan, on my website, there's a tips on how to apply for details section. On there, I show you, there's like links on how to apply for travel records. So you don't need to have your old passport. If it's under 30 years of travel history that you need, you go to the department. If it's over 30 years, generally you go to the National Archives. But those links are on the website if you want to have a look at that. I also did a video last week in my live showing people how to do it online. So yeah, hopefully that will help. Okay, just going through the questions. So Alicia, kia ora Irina, could you please provide some advice with regards to my brother? He came to Australia when he was a teenager to play rugby for 2 weeks. Could he move to Australia and apply for PR using an RRB? Yes, but again, there's a couple of things to be mindful of when that happens. So getting specific advice would be good. He will need to, he can definitely do that. So long as he came before the 1st of September 94, that's the most important thing. The rest of the other criteria you can work with. He might not qualify straight away, so that's what I'm saying. There's a few things, but you can make it happen pretty quickly. Now, the questions are jumping around, so I'm just going to scroll back because sometimes they don't have them in the right order. And I'll better have a look on the private messages. Okay. So this one, are you able to help with my citizenship application, please? I have a RRB police check complete in Australia to hold a current New Zealand and British passport. I've been living since 2008. I don't think this one's for here. Is that one? This one. Trying to apply through immigration online system for a 32-year-old son's Australian citizenship. When we get to page 4, it blocks us out saying he does not hold the correct visa. We have his movement records and believe he's eligible. Could you confirm this from the next screenshot, please? Okay, I'll have to have a look at that one later. Okay, cool. Oh, look at that. It's 10 to 3, 10 more minutes. I had thought, oh, probably only half an hour. Not many questions have been coming through lately, but hopefully that little explanation of how our resident status works has helped you to understand it a bit more. Like I said, on the website, I've got a bit of a timeline. And yeah, just dates. There's significant dates there and explanations for each of those dates as to how they affect us. But the L on the P plate is the most important one, I think. I reckon that's the most, yeah, that's the one that helps us really understand what we are in the moment. Then the next step probably would be to get a Vivo check. That's that visa check, just to verify that you are. Because the problem with a Vivo check, it'll say that you're a TY444 visa holder, but it won't tell you if you're an L plater, nor will it tell you if you're an L and a P plater. It doesn't do that. And there's nothing that we can apply for from immigration or Centrelink or anywhere that confirms that we have the status. So this status is equal also to people being called eligible New Zealand citizens. So that's the proper word used, or words used in the immigration law. But also you might have heard of the term protected SCV holder. This is what a protected SCV holder is. All they are someone who holds an L plate and a P plate at the same time. So yeah, hopefully that helps. I'll just have a quick look. I might as well just stay here for a few more minutes and see if there's anything else I missed. So I've got here that in 2016 was when the 189 visa was introduced for New Zealand citizens. That's one where you've got to earn the 53,900. But to apply for that, you have to be a 444 visa holder. So this kind of New Zealander can apply for it, but so can this kind of New Zealander, which is why I explained earlier, sometimes it's not good for this person to apply for a full license because they might be the doorway for their whānau. They apply for the 189, their whānau can then basically piggyback on their application. It's much cheaper for them to do it this way and be included. That's the best way to do it. The 189 is a really good visa. Sometimes people ask me, but I'm too old. I can't apply for that. Like, what else can I apply for? But the 189, there's no age restriction on it. And there's also no age restriction on citizenship. So when you are ready to apply for your full license, your Australian citizenship, you don't have to be under a certain age. And with citizenship, you also don't need to pass a medical. People sometimes get the medicals muddled up. If you're applying for the resident return visa, it's the only visa that I know of that does not make you apply for a medical. Other visas can make you apply for a medical, but not with a resident return visa. Okay, I've got another question here. Shikara, kia ora. I have a child in my care who was approved via Centrelink for disability payments as he is diagnosed intellectually disabled. I was declined to receive those payments due to my current visa. Would your services be able to help me in any way? I've lived here since 2006. Thank you for your information. I'm not sure if we could help you, Shikara. It depends on what you're eligible for. And yes, that is very common that this happens. So you get this crossover where a child qualifies, but because of the parent status, it might disadvantage the child, or you can't access it because of your status. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I could look at it, but I can't say here right now that I can definitely help. I have to know a lot more. Okay, so helping with residency or citizenship. Well, ultimately, we want citizenship. I'm not sure if your child is already an Australian citizen, what the situation, or were they born here, how old they are, whether you qualify for any pathways, or if you're married or have a partner, whether they qualify. It really depends. I've got to look at a whole lot of situation for you, a whole lot of your circumstances to work out what you might be able to do. If your child isn't an Australian citizen, there will also be the challenge of possibly overcoming a medical examination, but it's not impossible to achieve. It's just, it can be quite complex and take time too. So it all depends, Shikara, on what the whole situation is. Okay, so kia ora ki. The 189, how long does it take? At the moment, they say 14 to 16 months, but that processing time changes from month to month. So at the beginning of this year, they were saying it was taking up to 33 months. Last year, when we were doing them, they were taking usually on average between 3 to 6 months. It does chop and change depending on what's happening in the department. So yeah, cool. Some really good questions. Yeah, so and Shikara, you're saying it's not uncommon for people to not be sure what they're asking for, because often people will say to me, I want to apply for citizenship. How much is it going to cost? And I don't know how much it's going to cost because, one, I don't know if they're an L-plater. I don't know if they're this. I don't know if they need to apply for a visa that's going to include their family members. I've got no idea. So until I understand all of those things, only then can I give some advice about what's available, what the risks are, and what the costs are, including what our costs will be and how long it's going to take. Kia ora, Tony. I mean, Tony, Toki. Toki. Kia ora, darling. Yes, it's Friday. Gotta love Fridays. So it's been a big week. Yesterday we had a visa, a 189 granted for a mum and a daughter. It took, I think we counted, it took 15 months. It was quite stressful because the daughter she's about to turn 22 years of age, and she was included. So mum earns the 53,900 plus. They live on their own. The daughter is dependent, so she did have a part-time job, but not earning enough to live on her own, and she was dependent on mum. With a 189 in that type of situation, you can include dependent children up to the age of 23, so long as they don't turn 23 whilst the visa is being processed. The other tricky thing to know about that type of visa is that when you do include children who particularly are above 18 and over, they're not allowed to go and work full time, or they're not allowed to work and earn enough income to live on their own, or they can't earn more than 50% of what they need to live on their own. So they need to be dependent on you for more than 50% of what they need. And the only thing we're allowed to consider with the department and the law is the only thing the department will allow us as parents to pay for is their shelter, so accommodation, their clothing and food. When the department calculate the cost of what it costs to look after a dependent child, those are the only things they'll consider. And I'm sure many of you, like me, laugh because our kids cost us a hell of a lot more than that. And it's not just that you pay for to look after a child, particularly when they get older too. So in the case of a 189, you can definitely include your children if they're up to the age of 23, but be mindful the visa has to be granted before their 23rd birthday, otherwise they have to be removed. The visa doesn't get cancelled for everyone on the application, but it will for that one family member. So if you've got children getting older and they are living with you, it is really, really important, because it can take 14 to 16 months for this visa to be granted at the moment. It's really, really important that you, if you want to do something for them, you do it well in advance of their 23rd birthday. Sometimes people say, you know, my child's dependent, but they're not in study. The amazing thing about the 189 is our children don't need to be studying at all. So they can be, so long as they're at home, so long as they're living with you and they're dependent on you for more than 50% of their needs can only be shelter, food and clothing, then they can definitely be included. But again, it's best to get advice around that, because there are some stipulations, and each case is a bit different. So the department does look at these really closely, you know, and they'll pull it apart and they'll make you prove it even further down the track as it gets closer. So even a year later. So a year can be a really long time for a whānau to wait for the visa to be granted, especially when you've got adult children who are included in their application. But if they go and work full time, then they end up having to be removed from the application. And it's pretty gut wrenching if that has to happen. But that's how that visa works. But it is easier than trying to do sponsorship. Sponsorship's got a whole much harder criteria for our kids to pass. But yeah, I'll talk about that another time. I think I've talked about some of that in some of the previous videos. But okay, that's 1 minute past 3, and I've talked for a whole hour again. Never run out of things to talk about. Have a good weekend, everyone, and sending our aroha to all of our people in whānau over in New South Wales and Victoria especially. You know, those two states in massive lockdowns still. It just seems never ending. And hopefully one day we can all just open up and travel, especially to New Zealand. Anyway, ngā mihi everyone, and have an awesome weekend. I'll see you next Friday if you want to join me for another kōrero. Kia ora, Gina. Yeah, oh, thank you. All right. Ka kite, everybody. Yeah. See you, James. See you, Selena.